for that. um, so this is actually this is the part. So far it was more or less preparing the ground and talking about the purpose of the seminar, what we're trying to accomplish, what we're not trying to do, and introducing you to the Upanishads that are Vedanta. They are the ground of this whole philosophical system. It's what everyone is trying to explain, the basis of it. And now we actually begin the discussion of the two sides. So we'll discuss, this is actually the section on the opponent, talking about Shankaracharya's system. And I should mention that much of what I'll say about Shankaracharya, I speak about him in general, but it's given by not just him, but much of what I'll add is given by his illustrious disciples, people like Vachaspati and Padmapada, who have written after him. So this is really that part. And then we're going to go to the battle, the refutation afterwards, okay? And then the peace treaty. So let me say that for those of you who make it through the end, I have a really nice treat for everyone at the end. There's some really beautiful verses that you're going to enjoy that will purify the environment and atmosphere of any trace of Mayavad that might be left over from the seminar. So any worries that you have will be alleviated when we hear those. So those come tomorrow. Okay, so this is, we talk about Shankaracharya's philosophy. For this part, everyone should cover their ears and keep their ears covered, okay, for this section of the seminar. Here we go. I introduced the term advaitha, and now let's talk about what Shankaracharya says. Okay, so the first thing, for Shankaracharya, the fundamental principle is Brahman is one. And this is true for all Vedantists, not just for him. But for him, the idea that Brahman is one, that ultimate reality is unified, means certain things that it doesn't mean for others. For one thing he says is that for Brahman to be one, he is immutable. That means not changing. He never changes. The reason he cannot change is because any kind of change means temporality. It means that he is Brahman, or it is temporary in some way. Because if Brahman has some attribute and then doesn't have an attribute, or moves or changes in some way, that Brahman that was originally there has now changed, therefore it's temporary, and anytime anything is temporary, it is a cause for suffering, right? Temporariness means suffering, at least in this world. And so he's immutable because he's without suffering. And the second thing is that he says there's no change because any change would imply some departure from perfection. So if you imagine that Brahman is perfect, okay? So if he changes, suppose today he's perfect and then tomorrow he changes, then what's happening? Is he becoming more perfect? And if that's the case, then yesterday he was not perfect. Or yesterday he was perfect and today he's becoming less perfect, which also, either scenario is not acceptable, right? So therefore, Brahman has to be unchanging. Okay, so we've got a unified, unchanging reality. The second thing to mention is that Brahman has no attributes. The reason for no attributes is quite straightforward. Anytime you attribute anything, you introduce duality. Any type of attribute creates a relationship between subject and predicate. So if you remember back to elementary school grammar, the subject is what is being described and the predicate is what is being described about it. So John is a painter. John is the subject. Painter is the predicate, right? So the attribute of being a painter is being predicated of John. But this immediately introduces duality. As soon as you have subject-object, subject-predicate relationships, you have the potential for more than one thing that's present. That which is there and that which is attributed of it. That other thing might just be a quality, but it is something else, right? You've got a painter, you've got painting, you've got paint. All these things are introduced as soon as you attribute being a painter of John. John is a painter. If you say John is black or John is white, then you've introduced the existence of a quality, white or black, that is attributed to John, right? So as soon as you have subject predicate, you've got more than one thing. You've got duality that is present there. And that duality then introduces relativity into Brahman. Brahman's existence now becomes relative or conditional on certain things that are potentially extraneous to Brahman. Just like if I say, Srivas is wearing an orange shirt today, okay? So that, now what I've done is I've predicated Srivas's existence on the existence of an orange shirt. And this does two things. One is I've introduced duality. There's now him and there's an orange shirt. And secondly, I've introduced change. Because if he decides to take off the orange shirt and decides to wear a green one, then now he is different, right? So change has been introduced, duality has been introduced, and relativity has been introduced. Srivas's existence is now relative to the existence of an orange shirt. He's existing in relation to someone else. So Brahman is no longer absolute. Brahman is no longer one. And that's the fundamental pillar of the Upanishads, according to Shankaracharya. And so, for that reason, it's impossible for him to think of a Brahman who has any change or variety or any attributes that are present within him. Okay, so completely unattributed, non-variegated reality. Now, here's the challenge. All language requires subject and predicate. All language requires subject and predicate. You cannot talk without putting things in a subject-predicate relationship, without attributing something to someone. Anything you try to say, this room is cool, this room is warm, right? What have I done? I've attributed a quality to this room. If I say Brahman is blissful, what have I done? I've attributed a quality to Brahman. Anytime we open our mouth for the use of language, we create attributes and we create subject-predicate relationships. So what do? The scriptures use language, yes? The Upanishads use language. They say Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma. Brahman is Satya, Jnana, Ananta. He's eternal, he's truth, he's knowledge. Brahman is unlimited. They say so many things. How do we deal with those? So Shankaracharya says that any kind of language cannot actually describe Brahman, cannot describe the absolute reality. Rather, language, the language of the scriptures or any kind of language is only meant to point us in the direction of the absolute. So it's kind of like that example from Nyaya of seeing the moon through the trees. You know this example? If someone asks you, where's the moon? And you say, oh, they're right there in the sky. And they go, I can't see where. And then you tell them, you see that tree there? Yeah, I see the tree. You see those two big branches? Yes. Look between the branches. you'll see the moon. So what have I done? What relationship do the branches have to the moon? None, right? The moon is not affected by the branches. I've used the branches as a means of indicating to the person that they can see the moon. In the same way, the Upanishads, the Gita, all of these scriptures say things like Brahman is eternal, full of knowledge, blissful, as a way of showing us which direction to look. But knowledge of Brahman is precognitive. What that means is that there is a moment of realization that propels us beyond words, beyond language, beyond reason. Because even thinking requires subject and predicate relationships. I'll give you one example. Think of the absolute, unattributed, unchanging, unifying Brahman. Think of that Brahman. What are you thinking of? What are you seeing? Yeah, but what you're thinking is, okay, what came to my mind was kind of a generic sort of energy. It was slightly yellowish, to be honest. And it was big, and it kind of was shaped like a circle in my mind, yeah? But what did I just do? I attributed like 6 different things to this unattributed reality, right? I called it a circle. I said it was slightly yellowish. It had this energy flow to it. There was some kind of power to it. There was all these images that appeared in my mind when I tried to think of it. Just like language cannot be unattributed, thinking also cannot be unattributed. Because thinking requires language. Language requires thinking. These two are inseparable. All the Vedantists agree about this. This is why at the beginning, the Lord thought, tadaikshata, let me become many. So he used words. And Jiva Goswami says, this is an aside, he says that this shows that the Lord uses language right at the start, that words exist from the beginning. Language and thinking go hand in hand together. There's no thinking without language. So here's the problem. If you can't use language to describe it, means you can't use reason to think of Brahman also. So knowledge of Brahman is an intuitive realization. It's a moment of brilliance where you go. It's an aha moment where that catapults your mind beyond reasoned thought. It's a precognitive state of knowledge. So what's a precognitive state of knowledge? Shankaracharya explains. He says, this is like the consciousness that a person has during deep, dreamless sleep, where there is no dreamer and there is no dream. So the dreamer is the subject, the dream is the object. But when you have neither deep, dreamless sleep, but you are still cognitively, you're still conscious. That's a state of pure consciousness. Now, it's not the state of liberation because there's no knowledge there. It's a state of ignorance. But he says this is an example of how you can be conscious without having an object of consciousness. So this is knowledge of Brahman is knowledge with no object. It's consciousness with no object. It's an aha moment that propels you beyond reason, thought, and beyond language. So, the consequences of this are significant. Every statement of the scriptures is only indirectly applied to Brahman. When the scripture says, Satchid Ananda, that Brahman is eternity, knowledge, and bliss, this is an indirect statement. It's not direct. You cannot say, really, that Brahman is bliss. What you can say is that Brahman is not misery. You can deny certain things of Brahman, but you can't say what Brahman is. You can deny attributes, but you cannot apply attributes to Brahman. Even the denial, he says, is in some sense attributing a negative to Brahman. So therefore he says that ultimately words fall away from Brahman. They turn back. Words cannot approach who this ultimate reality is. And so all the scriptures do is they point us in the right direction. They indicate, they push us to that moment where we go, I got it. This is why they repeat themselves again and again. Tattvam asi, tattvam asi, tattvam asi. So we get it. And then there's a moment of realization and you've got it. Okay? But when you get there, you have to leave the scriptures behind. He calls the scriptures a great boat that when you use it to cross the other side of the river, then you leave the boat behind. You don't carry the boat with you. The same is true of the guru. The guru is necessary to cross the river. But after you get to the other side, then there's no guru. Right? There's no difference even between self and guru. Okay? So Brahman is immutable, no attributes, and this leads to the very significant idea that he is beyond words. That words cannot approach, and therefore beyond cognition. Okay, so this is a theory of knowledge, a hermeneutics to interpret scripture. And if you remember, again as an aside, in the conversation between Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Prakashananda Saraswati, one of the things that he criticizes, Mahaprabhu criticizes Prakashananda, or also with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he says that you do not take the direct meaning of the scriptures. This is what he's referring to. He's not speaking of something merely in the sense of, oh, you should understand this verse like this, and I actually understand like this, but you understand. It's not a disagreement about how you should read the meaning of the word or what definition you should choose from the dictionary. It's something very, very fundamental, where Shankaracharya comes to the point of saying that none of the statements of scripture apply directly to Brahman. Every statement has to be read indirectly, as a way of teaching. That's all they're doing. Is there a technique for teaching? They're not actually conveying the direct truth. They're not conveying the truth directly. Okay, so now, this idea of Brahman as without attributes, as one, what does this say about us? So we've done Brahman. Let's look at what he says about the jiva. So about the jiva, of course there cannot be multiple individual souls. That would be a direct violation of Brahman's unity, his uniqueness, his simplicity. So the multiplicity of jivas is not something we can hold on to. However, we do see a world where there are many individuals who are present. How do we deal with this? And here he gives a metaphor that's probably the easiest way to explain the idea of the ghatakasha, it's called. And I'm going to modify the metaphor just slightly to make it a little bit clearer. Imagine you have a pot, you have a jar within water, within the ocean. Now, the water within the jar is separated, it's different from the water outside the jar. The water inside the jar is limited, whereas the ocean is more or less unlimited. You've got the water inside the jar is shaped in this way, and it's shaped like a jar. Whereas the water outside is amorphous. It doesn't have any shape. It flows in whatever direction. That's like the jiva. The living entity is the same thing as Brahman. The water inside the jar and outside the jar is actually the same thing. They're identical. Except for the jar. And the jar, he says, is upadhi. Upadhi means a limiting adjunct. That's a little bit of a technical term, but limiting is clear. It's something that limits. And adjunct means it's not essential. It's something that's adjoining, it's added. So it's something that is not Brahman, it's not us, but it's added and it limits us. So a limiting adjunct, upadhi. So we're familiar with this term as well, and we use it in a similar way, although to a different conclusion. So upadhis would be something like this body would be an upadhi. The conception that I'm black, or I'm white, or I'm a man, or I'm a woman, or I'm rich, or I'm poor, or I'm smart, or I'm foolish, all of these are upadhis that are applied to the body that do not apply to the self within, to the soul. So that jar is like an upadhi. The idea is once you shatter the upadhi, then the upadhis fall away, and what happens to the water inside? Yeah, actually, technically, nothing happens to it. It stays in the condition it always was. It's just we recognize it as being the ocean. Shankaracharya actually never speaks of merging into Brahman. The reason is because of what I said earlier in response to someone's question, that merging is always a problem, because if you merge, then what does it assume? Well, first it assumes that there were two things to start with, right? How could you merge A and B unless there were two different things? And Shankaracharya is never willing to acknowledge that there are two things. There's only ever one thing. And it's just that because of these upadhis, and these upadhis, what are the upadhis? I should have mentioned this. They're basically forms of avidya, or ignorance. It's ignorance only. It's that confusion alone which makes us think that the water is inside the pot is different than the water outside the pot. It's shaped differently, when in reality there is not any difference. It doesn't merge into it. It doesn't go into it. It just is. So you don't merge into Brahman after liberation. You are Brahman. It's just that when that upadhi is lifted, this conception that I am this body, then you come to realize what is always the case, namely you are Brahman. You are that one reality. You're not a part of it. You're not a section of it. You're not a little drop of it. You are it. Right? You are it. Okay, so jiva, upadhi, and avidya. Okay, this is the concept of the living entity, of the self. Now, what consequences does this have for the world around us? So we saw Brahman, then we went to the jiva, the individual selves, and now the world. So the variety of the world is something that can definitely not be sustained, just like the individuality of the self cannot be sustained, because Brahman is one. So we're going to have to deal with that. So what do we do? And here we come to that famous metaphor of the rope and the snake to explain a very important concept. A man walks out late in the evening when it's dark, outside the front door of his house, walks into the driveway and sees a snake coiled up, screams and runs back into the house. The next morning, he comes out the door again, opens it really slowly, and sees the snake is still there. But it's not a snake, it's a rope. And he laughs to himself, and others laugh at him because he was scared of just a rope. So, a totally imaginable scenario, okay, in places like India and other countries where there are poisonous snakes, everyone is afraid of snakes, and proud to be afraid of snakes. That's how you live. So, an imaginable scenario, but here's the key. The snake, there was never a snake. The snake was superimposed upon the rope, yes, by the minds of the person. Because of ignorance or avidya, that snake was superimposed. And that superimposition is called adhyasa. Adhyasa, as means to place, and adhi means on top. So it's superimposition. You superimpose the idea of a snake onto the rope when there was none. When the sun of knowledge arises, you come out and you realize So, to our point about impersonalism, this is okay. So in the metaphor, then, Brahman is the rope, the one reality. This world is the snake, and that man is us. We come out, and because of our ignorance, all we're seeing, what is this world? Brahman. That's the only thing that exists. But because of our ignorance, we see Brahman, we experience Brahman, we interact with Brahman, and we think of it as this world with all these varieties and all these individuals and differences and colors and different things. Why? Because we impose these upadhis upon Brahman. Or we impose our ignorance upon Brahman. We create a snake when in fact there is a rope. So, when the Upanishads say, go back to that statement, let me become many, let me propagate myself. It thought, let me become many, what's happening there? All that's happening is that in thinking, it's that Brahman is going out onto its driveway and it's looking at the rope and it's turning it into a snake. The creation of the world, is it really creation? Is anything being created? No. It's simply a superimposition. It's a projection. The world is a projection onto, that's maybe a more contemporary way of saying it than superimposition. It's a projection, just like in a movie theater. We sit down to watch a good film, and we become totally absorbed in the actions of the film. Right? And if it's the Titanic, then someone's always crying in the back. And then you can come to that person and you can say, look, there's nothing happening, right? Means you turn on the lights, and what's there? Nothing. It's just a projection. We've projected something onto a screen. This is actually another metaphor that the Advaitins use, that of bimba pratibimba, of the item and its reflection. Right? So this is kind of a reflection. Is we reflect reality onto this screen, and then we place ourselves into it. We start identifying with the character in the story, right? Who was the actor in Titanic? I don't know. I never saw the movie. Okay, so we put ourselves in the shoes of Leonardo DiCaprio or whoever the heroine was in the story, right? And we start feeling their emotions. Are we there? No. Are we on a sinking ship? No. Is there anything going on in that room? No. When the sun of knowledge arises or the lights turn on, you come to realize, you shake yourself off, and the memories of it stay with you. You might dream about the movie overnight, or actually this was the case with my kids. I was trying to explain to them why we don't go to the movies regularly. And at some point then, I think it was on an airplane, they saw a movie, like some kids' animation. And then my little one, Purushottam, he was complaining. He said, Dad, I can't get it out of my head. It's stuck inside. I'm dreaming. And I said, see, now you see why we don't see. Oh yeah, we have to think of Krishna because this is not coming out of my head. So it's like that. It imposes itself on us, right? And this is essentially what avidya is for Shankaracharya. It's simply a projection. The world is us. It's not us, it's Brahman coming into projecting itself or identifying itself with what it is not, creating the superimposition and becoming totally confused. So the world is not actually a creation of anything. It's not a transformation of anything. There's no parinama, no transformation happening. It's vivarta. It's merely an apparent transformation. It's only an appearance. That's all it is. And the process of knowledge is one where someone, usually the guru and the scripture, comes in and they turn the lights on. And they force us to meet, to face what that reality is. Namely, there is no individual self and there is no world with a variety. There's only one thing, and that is Brahman. Okay, so the big question now is the snake. Okay, is the snake real or is it unreal? So we're still speaking as Advaitins here. Okay, so I'm not presenting a counter argument to this. This is a question that they raise. What is the status of the snake? Is the snake real? Well, the answer is no, because something that the man comes out later in the day and sees that it was just a rope. So clearly the snake was not real. Something that is real cannot be shown to be false later on. This is a principle of Vedanta. That which is real will always be real. This is the definition of sat. It's not that it was real then and now it's not real, or vice versa. So it's not real. Is the snake unreal? Well, no, because it had a real effect. Yes? In other words, the person was stricken by fear. And certainly the changes in heart rate and all of that was real. And so it has a real effect, and that which is pure unreality can have no real effects. This is another principle of Vedanta. The idea that the reality of the cause is transferred to the effect as well. In fact, again, as an aside, this is why the Vaishnavacharyas say that this world must be real, because they say the world is a creation of someone who is real. And a real person cannot have an unreal creation. The analogy that Jiva Goswami gives is, why would a millionaire need to create counterfeit notes? Why would Bill Gates need to deal in counterfeit money? If you've got enough, you're not going to need it. It's only when it's absent, right? So when the Lord is the king of reality, he himself is real, then why would he create something that is unreal? The world must also be real, because a real cause has a real effect. Satkarya. Okay, so Shankaracharya says, yes, because the snake was not, because the effect was real, therefore the snake cannot be purely unreal. So what have we come to? The snake is not real. The snake is not real, and it's not unreal. Okay, great. So, and this is called Maya. Okay, this is the definition of Maya for the Advaitins. Maya is that which is neither real nor unreal. And therefore, Maya is anirvachaniya, which means indescribable or undefinable. You cannot define Maya, you cannot describe Maya, because it is neither real nor unreal. The status of the world cannot be said to be true, it cannot be said to be false. So again, the popular notion that the Advaitins consider the world to be unreal, Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya, that idea is it's a watered down version of Advaita. In general, okay, it's not, you can say it's false in the sense that it's not real like Brahman is, but technically they're not saying it's false either. It's neither real nor unreal. It's in this third category in the middle. Okay? Now you have to use every strength you have to resist tearing this down, okay? We're gonna debate it a little later. Okay. And again, the movie screen is a great example. Is the movie screen real? No. There's no Titanic sinking in the theater. Is it unreal? Well, no, because you're really absorbed in it, and it's fun to watch movies, and it has lasting effects. Okay, so this is the world. Okay, last thing in regard to Shankaracharya. What about God? Okay. What about Ishvara? What about the Lord? How do we make sense of him? Well, clearly the scriptures do talk about Ishvara. There's the Ishopanishad, for example, which begins with the word Isha, which is Lord. So, who is the Lord? And there's Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, and Bhagavad Gita is one of the essential texts of Vedanta. Upanishads, Gita, and Brahma Sutra, or Vedanta Sutra. These three are called the Prasthanatraya. They're the three fundamental pillars of Vedanta. And anyone who wants to be considered a Vedantist has to be able to explain and comment upon these three: Upanishads, Vedanta Sutra, and Bhagavad Gita. So the Gita certainly speaks of the Lord. Krishna says, Mattaha parataram nanyat, there's no truth superior to, etc., etc. So what's going on here? What about the Ishvara? So here we request forgiveness from Shri Shri Radha Madan Mohan, because this is terrible to say in front of them, but for their service, we will say it, and then we'll talk about why it doesn't work. The Ishvara is merely a jiva. Let's put it this way. The Ishvara is a jiva with a really big pot, really big jar. Okay? It's a jiva whose abilities and knowledge and upadhis are of a scale that we don't currently have access to, that we do not enjoy. Yet. Okay? Yet. But the Ishvara is we are covered by avidya, that upadhis, those little pots. Ishvara is covered by Maya, the whole thing. Right? This is like a grand, great illusion. So you're in a really big pot here. And as a result of that, the Ishvara is basically enlightened. He's an enlightened jiva who is not yet he's someone who has worked his way out of illusion, okay, but is not yet fully liberated. I mean, it's not at the point of when you're fully liberated, there's no you, right? So we can't speak of the Ishvara at all once he's liberated, because it's not. But it's a state of being basically as good as liberated. You have, so even more than Jivan Mukta. It's a position where because you are covered by all of Maya, your pot is so big, therefore the Ishvara is called Sarvagya. So Shankaracharya says that the Ishvara is all-knowing, not because he's the supreme, but because he knows all of Maya. Because his pot includes everything. Right? He's covered by Maya as a whole. So you can speak of the Ishvara as an impersonalist, you can speak of the Ishvara as worthy of worship. You can speak of the Ishvara as worthy of devotion. You can speak of the Ishvara as all-knowing and all-powerful. Why? Because they are covered by a grander Maya than any of us are. Their space to operate is huge. They know things that we cannot hope to know. But that doesn't take away from the fact that we too can get there one day. We can get better because we can be liberated. We can come to a point where we are not only Ishvara, but we are Brahman. And so, you hear this again and again and again in terms of impersonalist philosophy. It's one of the most common conceptions of Krishna that you will find anywhere in India. The idea that Krishna is basically You've heard the phrase, it's not Krishna we worship, but the one within Krishna. Yes? So this is that idea. What's the one within Krishna? Krishna is what? The pot. Right? He's the individual, the individuality, just like I'm Ravi Gupta, that's my pot. And it's a fake pot. It's going to be shattered one day, a death at least, right? In the same way, Krishna is a big pot. And so we're not worshiping him, not the one who plays the flute and is colored blue, because that's just the grand pot, the jar. What are we worshiping? The one within Krishna. Okay, for those who just walked in, disclaimer, this is not our view, okay? We are talking about a view that is downright offensive and we do not accept, okay? Okay, so, but we need to know the opponent if we're going to put up a good fight. So, so that's what they're saying. We have to worship the one within Krishna, because within Krishna is Brahman. That's the water in the pot. That is the same as the water in us. That's the same as the water in the ocean. So who are you really worshiping when you worship the one within Krishna? Ourselves. Who's actually all-knowing when you say Krishna is all-knowing? We are. Right? So Krishna provides, just like this video that Srivas Prabhu showed me last night, is you are the Janmashtami greetings. It was that Krishna is the example for all of us. He gives us, he's the exemplar of what a person can do, how they can accomplish achieving their own divinity. That's something like that it said. One can achieve one's divinity, and Krishna shows us how we can all achieve. He is the king that each one of us can be. That's what it said. And just as Krishna is the accomplished yogi, again, something it said, is the accomplished yogi, in the same way, we too can one day become that accomplished yogi, or even better. So worship of the Ishvara is useful temporarily. Bhakti is useful because it moves us at least from our little pot, our constrained world, to something a little bit bigger. It's a process of broadening and widening. So it's good for all of us beginners to worship the deity, to pray to him, etc. And he can help us. He can help us because Ishvara is in this world. Ishvara is living and alive like we are. But in the ultimate sense, no. We have to go beyond, right? We have to reach beyond, and we have to recognize that Bhakta and Bhagavan are eventually one. And so deity worship then becomes truly something of the lowest level, because it becomes really just something of pure upadhi. You're just worshiping the jar. That's all you're doing. And it's only when you can shatter the form, that's when you get to the real person. Okay, that was really painful to say. This is why knowledge is the real practice, and bhakti is just a stepping stone to knowledge. Before I go into refutation, I want to read for you something that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur says. Okay, and he's referring to this. This is from Sharanagati. It's song number 3 in the limb that is pratikulyasya varjanam, giving up that which is unfavorable for the practice of bhakti. And he says, he talks about two types of association that I never want. The association of sense enjoyers and the association of Mayavadis. Of the two, he says the association of sense enjoyers is better. Because at least their hearts can be purified by the holy name and by Vaishnav Sangha. That's why we're all here. But, he says, and now I quote, but the heart which is penetrated by the offensive influence of impersonal philosophy becomes hard as a thunderbolt by degraded sophistry argument. The Mayavadi declares that the true form of bhakti, its object, Sri Krishna, and its possessor, the devotee, are all transitory and illusory. Fie on his pretense of so-called service to Krishna. Fie on his pretense of engaging in so-called hearing and chanting of Krishna's glories. His recitation of prayers strikes the body of Krishna with blows more cruel than thunderbolts. So you will often find that many impersonalists will utilize the forms of bhakti, singing of Krishna's names and bhajans, sometimes very beautifully, talking about Krishna Lila, Krishna Katha, engaging even in deity worship. And yet, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying that such songs and prayers strike Krishna's body with blows more cruel than thunderbolts. Why? Because those prayers are not meant to glorify him at all. There's a very ulterior intention that's buried down below and down inside. And it can become very difficult to sometimes unpack what's actually there. It can become very easy to get into the mood and say, well, it's just Hari Kirtan going on or Krishna Bhajan is going on. Well, what's the problem? We can hear and chant, but what's the intention behind it, right? What's the meaning? Why are we deploying those names of the Lord? And when it's with a desire to undermine the Lord himself, to attack him, then it's not Janmashtami greetings at all, right? It's trying to kill Krishna is what we're trying to do, not celebrate his birth, but to hope for his death. And so I remember when I was a teenager growing up in Boise, there was a group of impersonalists, a particular organization that came and they held a satsang in Boise. They rented a hall and they held a satsang. And the philosophy was totally impersonalist, just not even like half-covered impersonal. It was just straight down the line, Mayavadi philosophy. And everyone, they'd go on and on about this and that and talking about concepts like this. And over time, people were kind of nodding off. And so then they'd stop and they'd do kirtan. They'd do bhajan. And then after a while, they'd stop the bhajan and then he'd go on with his, impersonalist philosophy. We are Krishna and find the one within Krishna and I am God and you're God. And then people would start to nod off and he'd start doing his kirtan again. And I remember sitting there feeling so angry that you have no right to use kirtan. We believe in kirtan. That's our tool. If you want people to know Mayavad philosophy, use your own tools. Deal with your own boring philosophy. It's putting people to sleep. Don't use our tools to keep them awake. There's meaning behind the mantra. Anyway, the next day, they came to the temple. And it was incredible. There was a little group of people who came with this guru, and everyone everyone was of Indian background, and so everyone in the group came to the temple and at least ceremonially, bowed before Radha Banki Bihari, except this guru. He could not bend his neck before the Lord. It was just out of courtesy, just culture. You go to a temple and you fold your hands, just, like this. And what was so ironic about the whole thing is that he had just spent the better part of the last evening talking about how God is present everywhere in everything. And yet, in this one place in Boise, God was not present, right? He could not bow his head anywhere. Why? Because there is no one worth bowing to. You are that Brahman. You are that walking Brahman. This is why the Mayavadi sannyasis would refer to each other, Namo Narayanaya. When Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya met Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he said, Namo Narayanaya. Krishnadas Kaviraj mentions that very joyfully, because he says, in that one instance, it was actually true. He got it right. It's like they say, even a broken clock tells the right time twice a day. So if you do Namo Narayanaya to everyone, when you actually meet Narayana, then okay, you got it right. And just that little thing, I'm sure, gave him a lot of sukriti there. And the Lord showed his mercy upon him. But anyway, so these guys, they came in and we sat down, and I was still itching from the previous night and fuming for a debate. I wanted to get into it, and this is a little bit of a teenage nature as well. You're kind of hot-blooded and you want to fight. And as Vaishnavas, we try not to fight, So this was an opportunity to express that. So we sat down and we started talking about Bhagavad Gita. From niceties, it went to the Gita. And then it got into it. And I said, I really like this point from last night, but I didn't like this one. And can you explain this further? And then we got into it further. And then he came to this verse. He says, Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasha ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. In reality, everything is being carried out by the three modes of material nature, Krishna says. But only the fool, the vimudha, thinks kartaham, I am the doer, I am the controller. So he says, see, Krishna is making it very clear that we are not the doer, we are not the controller. Only a fool in Maya thinks, I am the doer, I am the controller. In reality, there is no I, he's saying. And I said, no. He's saying, I'm not the doer. That we should not say, I am the doer, right? What's the opposite of I am the doer? I'm not the doer. What's the opposite of I'm the controller? I'm not the controller. The I is still there. The opposite of karta is dasa, is servant. You're not the doer, you're the servant, at least the observer. If you're not the doer, you're at least the spectator, if not the servant. But you're still there. You have not disappeared. You have not gotten dissolved. And that was it. And he didn't have a response to that. He really didn't. And then he took it to some other verse. But I knew when I had gotten it, so I kept bringing it back to that verse again and again. I want to hear your explanation of that verse. And anyway, I don't know what happened after that, but that experience is seared in my mind. It was really a fun experience. Okay. Anyway, so this is Shankara's idea of impersonalism, and in terms of Brahman, the Jiva, and the world, and what they all mean, as well as his understanding of language and scripture. Okay. Now, so what we're going to do is we're going to now show the counter-arguments to this particular view. I don't know if we'll get through all of that today, but at least some of it. For now, I want to ask briefly, are there any questions to clarify what I said here? So no counter-arguments or this doesn't make sense, because we'll go through all of that in just a few minutes. But anything here didn't make sense to you or you want some further clarification. Okay, so the mic is somewhere. Okay, why don't you start and then we'll head backwards.
I just want to know what is the difference between Mayavad, impersonalism and Brahmavad.
Oh yeah, okay, so I promised this question earlier. It's a good time to answer. So Mayavad, thank you for reminding me, Mayavad refers specifically to this doctrine that of Maya. That this world is Maya. That's something we also say, but we mean something very different by Maya. Here, the idea of Maya is that it is neither real nor unreal, which for practical purposes means it's unreal. But it's neither real nor unreal. And Mayavad is the idea that therefore our individuality and the Lord's individuality is all Maya. It's all impersonalism. Okay? That's Mayavad. So that's Mayavad. Impersonalism is simply the idea that God is impersonal. Okay? God is impersonal, that he is all-pervading, that he is present everywhere, that he has no form or attributes. Now that view in itself, on its own, is not unacceptable, so long it's not the last word. Okay? If we take the impersonalism and we add the Lord's personal feature to it, we get Mahaprabhu's Achintya Bheda Bheda, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. But when you stop and you say that impersonal feature is all there is, And therefore, the natural consequence, if you say that the only thing there is the impersonal reality, then you have to follow it by saying, therefore, any individuality, ours or the Lord's, is Maya. That's called Mayavad. Okay? Yes. Yes. Oh. The what? The Yeah. Okay, so to clarify the Brahmavadi as well, right? That's what you're saying? So the Brahmavadi is basically someone who is accepting the Lord's impersonal feature, but not necessarily denying the existence of the personal feature. So they may not have enough knowledge of the personal feature of the Lord, they may know nothing about it, or they may not know the feature, but they're not quite ready for it, or they're not interested in it. So the 4 Kumaras are examples of Brahmavadis. They approached Vaikuntha not knowing the form of the Lord, and before that point they were quite satisfied in their Brahmananda, in the bliss of Brahman. But then eventually they became personalists when they saw the Lord. So that's an example of Brahmavadi. A Mayavadi is someone who actively denies and attacks the reality of the Lord's form, his pastimes, his activities, his devotees. Yes? Okay. Yeah, you can.
My question was, according to Mayavad philosophy, is Maya all powerful? Like, in the sense that you're talking about how once we break that pot and we realize, or we stop placing like
no
identification.
So a Mayavadi would not consider Maya to be all powerful, because you can get out of Maya. That's the process of liberation, or mukti, is when Brahman frees itself from the shackles of Maya. That's how we become liberated.
So then is Krishna not all powerful because he's still under Maya?
Correct. So Krishna is not all powerful. He's still within the confines of Maya, right? But much more powerful than we are. Yeah. So within the confines of Maya, he's all powerful. Let's put it that way. Okay. One thing I forgot to mention actually, which is important to note, this point about Krishna being the largest upadhi, largest pot. One way in which you can, so the litmus test I use to test a translation of the Bhagavad Gita, the way you don't have to read the whole thing. The verses you go to, chapter 4 of Bhagavad Gita, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuthanam adharmasya tadatmanam srajamyaham. These final words, tadatmanam, so wherever there's a decline in religion, at that time I what? Okay, so how you deal with that is the litmus test here, because srajamyaham, at that time, atmanam srajamyaham. So many translations following this Advaita Vada, atmanam they'll take as a body, srajami they'll take as create. At that time, I create a body for myself. What is he saying? That the Brahman within has a pot to go around him. Okay? The word srajami also means to let loose, to appear. And atmanam primarily doesn't mean body, it means self. At that time, Prabhupada says, I descend myself. I appear myself. I flow forth into the world. That's how a Vaishnava will translate it. And an Advaitin will do something along the lines of, at that time I create a body for myself. So all you have to do, if that verse is such a separator, that's your litmus test. You come across a translation of the Gita and you want to see what its quality is, or you want to point out whatever it is, go to that verse and see how they deal with it. And if there's a subtle trace of Mayavad, it'll show up in that verse or the ones around it, where Krishna talks about avatar. Because the Mayavadis think of avatar very, very differently. It's God creating a body for himself, more or less like we create bodies for ourselves by descending into this world, except his body is much greater than ours. Okay, so that verse is a very helpful one, very crucial one. Yes, Prabhu.
You mentioned about all-knowing, and you also mentioned about the jiva's devotion to it. So you're also giving the example of this Mayavadi who is not bowing down head. So how does the element of bhakti help a Mayavadi come from this upadhi to Brahman realization?
Bhakti helps because it focuses the mind. It helps us to focus. Devotion is good. It makes the mind ekagra, focused on one object, which is helpful for meditation. And by observing the attributes of Krishna, you can see what you need to develop yourself. It creates a model for you to practice.
Another question is, you said this body of Krishna, or the ocean, the water within Krishna is all-knowing, but he is still within the confinement of Maya. That seems little contradictory. If you can explain how he is all-knowing, and yet Maya is more.
So because Maya is the totality of avidya, when he's covered by Maya, he's essentially covered by everything, the whole material cosmos. And so he knows everything within the material cosmos. But he still doesn't fully appreciate he's not yet fully liberated. Let's put it that way. He knows he's Brahman, and within the realm of Maya, he understands. This difference between Jiva and Ishvara is really hazy. Different Advaitins explain it in different ways. What is the exact difference between us and Ishvara? But to put it simply, the Ishvara is basically a better version of us, the version that we want to be.
This is not my question, I'm just reflecting that. So what you say is ocean is, the Ishvara is the entire ocean in jug?
Yeah, you could think of the entire ocean as within the pitcher, right? That would be Ishvara. Yeah. Shivasprabhu?
Well, to add to their fuel, so avajananti mamura manushim tanum ashritaha. So I take shelter of a body, which means Krishna is actually doing that. Why are you denying it? So
yes. So that's another litmus test for a translation of the Gita. Excellent. Avajananti mamudha manushim tanum ashrita. Anyone with a tinge of advaita will speak about Krishna seeking refuge in a human body or taking up a human body. Whereas a Vaishnava will put the question is, what is the cause of the mudhaness? Okay, what is the cause of the foolishness? Is it the person who thinks that Krishna is transcendent, or is it the person who thinks that Krishna is just human? And the Vaishnava will say, avajananti mamudha manushim tanumashita. The emphasis will be on the manushi, that the fool thinks I am a human body. And the Advaitins will put it the other way, right? That avajananti mamudha manushim tanuma. They don't know me who have taken shelter. They don't know the one within me because I've taken shelter of this body. So they do it exactly the opposite way. So that's another great litmus test for testing any translation of the Gita, is that verse. Yes, Prabhu.
So two connected questions, Prabhu. So what is if it is everything is Maya, what is it started? What is the desire to be in this situation currently? How do they explain that? That is, and when they want to, when a jiva wants to get out, even the Ishvara is within Maya. There is no one outside of that. Then how can they ever get out? How do they explain that?
So this is getting into the argument phase, the battle phase, because these are counter arguments. So we'll hold on to that. We'll definitely come back to what you said for sure. Okay? Yeah, Balaram?
We normally describe Maya as illusion in Vaishnavism, but here you said it's indescribable between not real and unreal, and not unreal. So could you elaborate the difference between those two definitions?
Yeah. So that's a very important question. We will talk about Maya in detail later, but let me say briefly here that our concept of Maya is very different than this, because for us, Maya is illusion, but in a very minimal sense. Maya is illusion in that what we hope to get out of it, her promises are illusion, right? So we think we can be happy forever in this world. That's an illusion. Our expectations of Maya are illusory. But Maya herself is not illusory because she is Krishna's Shakti. She is Krishna's energy. So she is real and true 100%. So not half unreal and half real, not like that. Totally 100% true and real. This material energy is Krishna, one of Krishna's eternal energies, right? So we actually do a great disservice when we put down this world a lot in our philosophy, because that's not what our philosophy is. This world is not a terrible place, and it's not a place that is unreal, it's not false, it's not fake, it's not a bad place. All it is that our expectations of this world are foolish, right? This world is perfect. Prabhupada says in his purport to Om Purnamadaha Purnam in Ishopanishad, he says, when it says Purnamadaha Purnat Purnamudachyate, from the complete and the whole comes the complete and the whole. And Prabhupada explains that as what comes from the complete whole? This world. What the thing that emerges from it is this world, and this world is complete and whole. That's significant because not everyone who interprets that verse sees it in that way. Most will refuse to read that as this material world because they say, how is this material world whole and complete? No, it's not. And it's a place of misery, it's terrible. And Prabhupada says, no, it's referring, in fact, Vaishnavacharyas will disagree on this point. Even in our own sampradaya, some teachers will reject Prabhupada's explanation on this point. But Prabhupada was very clear on the fact that this world is complete and whole for the purpose for which it was made. Right? Which is to help us living entities have a playground where we can pretend to be God, and when we get frustrated with that attempt, give us a path back to Godhead. That's what this world is meant for, and in that way the world is perfect, it's complete, and it's whole. And in that way it's a good place as well. So that's an idea of Maya that is not held by the Mayavadis, right? This world has no it cannot be said to be perfect and complete in any way because it's not even there. It's unreal. Right? Yeah.
And in the 15th chapter, or I'm not sure which chapter actually, it says that the material world is a reflection of the spiritual world. And how does that make both of them whole and complete?
Yeah. So again, a great question. The reflection, so a spiritual world has the substance, the material world has form in terms of the reflection, but the substance that it promises, it does not deliver, right? So just as I was saying, the tree's still there, and you can still respond to the tree and you can still experience it, but if you try to pick the fruits and eat it from the reflection, it doesn't work. Right? So when we try to enjoy the fruits of this world, it doesn't work. Because that's the promise of this world, that's the expectation from this world that is actually illusion. That's what illusion is when we look at the reflection is real. The reflection is present. The water upon which it reflects is real and true. It's just that the fruits are not going to nourish you in the way that the fruits on the actual tree do. And so when we expect this world to nourish us, to nourish the soul in the way that the spiritual realm does, that's when we get disappointed. And that's illusion. That's the real illusion. Yeah? Okay, let's shift over here so the ladies have a chance to ask some questions as well. And then next time, I promise, I'll start from the back and I'll work forward, because otherwise the devotees in the front have...
Thank you, Prabhu. I was thinking about the not real, the unreal thing that you were talking about. So I don't know whether this is a question related to this or this is a counter. I was thinking, you had mentioned about the question of when people are watching something on a movie theater, they're usually in a darkness. Only if you're in dark, you can actually watch that movie. So if the lights turn on, there's no movie anymore. So similarly, when we connect ourselves that we are this body, we go through all this roller coaster ride about the pains and pleasures of this world. But when I control my mind, and I know that I'm just a servant of Krishna, and this thing is just going to come and go, I won't be affected by the same thing that comes to me. Yes. So, but with Mayavadi philosophers, when we are looking at not real, unreal, their thought is more towards whether they are putting every time them they are the most important for them.
Yes.
Everything else is secondary. So with that barometer, they will find everything wrong. Yes. So I was just thinking that it's just because of what barometer you use in your life, you get affected by it.
Yes. Right? Yes, that's a very good point, something we will discuss further when we engage in the battle. Let me just say to that point, though, that Bhagavatam actually uses the rope and snake metaphor several times. I don't know if you've come across this in your study, but Bhagavatam uses rope and snake. That's a metaphor that does not belong to the Advaitins, but the Bhagavatam uses the rope and snake exclusively to talk about how we confuse the body with the self, right? So not to describe the creation of this world. They are using this metaphor to describe the creation of this world. How does this world exist? Well, it's the whole thing is a projection. It's seeing a snake where there's actually a rope. Whereas the Bhagavatam uses it to describe how we confuse matter with spirit. That we look at ourselves and we think, this is me, Ravi Gupta is me. I'm seeing the snake here, when in fact the rope is the person within. That's the actual person. So the rope snake metaphor is a good metaphor so long as it's not applied in the context of the creation of the material world. It's not sufficient for creation.
I have a question too. I was just thinking that what would you do with the, in your entire probably generations to come or generations who have been there, your family, everybody, if they are impersonalists, would you really talk to them about this? Because like 99% impersonal, maybe 1 or 2 people who are probably inclined towards devotion. What would you do?
So tomorrow we're going to talk about that. What do you do? How do you actually use this? This is an important question because there are proper ways of using this and improper ways of using it. And it's really important that we understand how. This is why I keep saying that it's so important to take in this entire seminar as a whole, because any part of it can be very easily misused if we don't go all the way to the end. Okay? Yes. This is a final question, and then we have to move on here.
So I was just wondering, like Adi Shankaracharya, he's also written Bhaja Govindam and Jagannath Ashtakam. Like in both of them, he's like, "Oh Bhaja Govindam Mudamate," and then in Jagannath Ashtakam he says, "Oh, Lord Jagannath is looking, his eyes are blooming like lotus petals." So how do we understand?
Yeah. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says that Shankaracharya was not actually a Mayavadi at all. He was Lord Shiva, who is Shiva, we know, of course, is the greatest Vaishnava, right? So he understands the glories of the Lord. And from our perspective, Shankaracharya leaves a little ray of hope for those who become entangled in his philosophical ideas and then want a way out. Right? Bhaja Govindam, Govindam Bhaja Mudamate, Samprapte, Sannihite Kale, Nahi Rakshati, Dukurun Karane. If it comes to a point where your grammatical analysis, Dukurun Karane, starts to become really frustrating, then you should understand that this will not protect you. Nahi Rakshati. All that will protect you is worship of Lord Govinda. So most scholars will go so far as to say that Shankaracharya was part of a Vaishnav milieu, that he grew up in a Vaishnav environment, and whenever he speaks about Ishvara and he has to give a name to him, it's always Vishnu. Yeah, it's always Vishnu. So he was, all the great acharyas actually, the Vedanta acharyas were more or less Vaishnavas in terms of their background, either explicitly or in a hidden way, they were Vaishnavas. Yeah. Okay, I think we need to stop here. My apologies for all those hands I couldn't get to. Next time we'll start in the back and I'll work our way forward so everyone gets a chance. Okay, so now we need to get on the attack here. So here begins the second part of the seminar, which is the battle. Okay? So we're going to go through each one of the arguments. His view of language and scripture, his view of Brahman, his view of the Jiva, and his view of the Lord, his view of the world. And we're going to dismantle them one by one using two things. One is Ramanujacharya's Saptavidha Anupapatti. Okay, this is a term you don't need to worry about, but it's called the 7 great untenables. Okay, actually, let me put that English up here. The 7 great untenables. So these are his 7 great attacks on the theory of Maya in Mayavad philosophy, and where he shows that Mayavad philosophy is not tenable, it doesn't work, it is self-contradictory. And these 7 are historic. They are so brilliant. To this day, they still make Mayavadis quake in their boots if you bring these 7 great ones up. And all the acharyas after him use these again and again and again. They're so effective. They're so good. So they're really brilliant. Ramanujacharya has done a great service to all the Vaishnavas that have come after him. So, first thing, okay, the first problem or issue. Mayavad philosophy leaves you tongue-tied. You can't really say anything with meaning. And this problem is not just, it is humorous, but it's more than that. Here's the issue. This is one of the 7 untenables, the Saptavidha Anupapatti. Ramanujacharya says that language is something that by its very nature is subject and predicate, right? It's upadhis, we talked about that. It's made of upadhis. Language is the primary content of scripture, shastra. That means both language and scripture are products of illusion. Yes, they're products of Maya, according to the Mayavadi's view, because they are engaged in these upadhi, the subject-predicate thinking. That means that knowledge which liberates you is actually a product of ignorance. Liberating knowledge is ignorance, which makes liberation impossible. To put it in the other direction, it says ignorance leads to liberation. Because that which is leading you, what leads you to liberation? Definitely Shastra, scripture. Shankaracharya, this was actually his one great contribution for which we are very grateful to him, is that he established the authority of the Vedas in the face of the Buddhists who rejected the authority of the Vedas. Like all Vedantists, Shankaracharya is clear on this point, that if you want to achieve liberation, you're going to have to use the scriptures, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, Vedanta Sutra. These scriptures are products of ignorance. They speak only ignorance because language is ignorance. Therefore, ignorance liberates you. And that is a contradiction. That's an untenable, he says. It's mutually contradictory. That liberating knowledge is ignorance, or ignorance liberates you. Either direction you take it, it doesn't make any sense. Okay? Our own perspective on the matter is that words are sorely inadequate to describe the Lord because they can never describe him completely. Not because they cannot describe him, but because they always fall short. It is not that we cannot say that Krishna his complexion is like a bluish rain cloud, or his eyes are like a lotus flower. Those are true and meaningful statements, but they still fail to capture the entirety of Krishna's beauty. They are still very meager in the face of what Krishna's eyes actually look like. How could a lotus possibly compare, right? And so then you get metaphors like the moon. Krishna's face is like the moon, except it's much better than the moon because the moon has spots on it everywhere. And so when Krishna appears in the form of Mahaprabhu, the moon hides itself because it's so embarrassed. So we try all these ways to go beyond the bounds of our metaphors in our language because Krishna is so much more. But what we can grasp of him, that's real, that's true. We're not going to let go of that. Scriptural statements need to be taken in their primary and direct sense. And that's very important. Okay, so that's the first point, is his idea of language. That we do not accept this idea that language has to be always taken in an indirect sense, that the scriptures are only pointing at the ultimate, that we have to let go of the scriptures at some point, and that's no. In fact, when Mahaprabhu meets Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and he debates with him, the final verse that he gives him to think about, before the debate is over, is the Atma Rama verse. Atma Ramas Chimunayo Nirgrantha Hyapyurukrame Kurvantya Haitukim Bhaktim Itham Bhuta Guno Hari, which essentially is a verse in Bhagavatam which explains why even those who are liberated, Atma Rama, still take the time to listen to Bhagavatam. It is not the case that once you come to a certain point, you leave the scriptures behind, like a boat. When you cross to the other shore, you leave the boat there. No. The scriptures are our constant companions. Even after liberation, even after achieving pure bhakti, even Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself would relish the verses of Srimad Bhagavatam. The only difference is that as we advance, we relish those verses at a deeper and deeper and deeper level than others. But the scripture is always with us. Same thing with the Guru. Because language is eternal and language can approach the Lord, therefore the Guru as well, the one who is the source of that language, who is the source of that knowledge, who gives us that Divya Jnana, is an eternal relationship. It's someone with whom we are eternally connected and for whom we are eternally grateful. So, the impersonalism leaves us tongue-tied, it also leaves us ungrateful for those who are the vehicles for our liberation, for our advancement. Ingratitude is not something that we can accept. Okay. But the problems with the metaphors are just as serious. They're very, very serious. So let's go through each one of the metaphors, and I'm going to go in the reverse, okay? I'm going to start with the rope and snake. And I'm going to go through them fairly quickly, the counter-arguments, because there are a lot of them and they're very snappy. They go nicely if we go quickly here. Okay, so you remember the rope and snake, superimposition of the world on Brahman. This is why there's a reality, yes? So, to confuse two things with one another, to confuse A with B, what has to be true about A and B for that confusion to take place? Both have to have some similarity in attributes, right? The man goes out the door, looks at the coiled up rope and screams, "Ah, a dog!" Do you think that could ever happen? No. Because there's not enough similarity between a rope and a dog, right? There's just no way you can, and if someone were to do that, we would say there's something wrong with their mind, that they're hallucinating, we would say, right? That's how we would define hallucination, when that confusion is not reasonable. When he goes out and he sees a snake, we don't consider that a hallucination. We consider that a confusion. Why? Because that's a reasonable confusion between the two. Why? Because the attributes match. There is similarity of attributes. Now, between the rope is Brahman and the snake is the world. The world that is superimposed on Brahman. In Mayavad philosophy, what is the similarity in attributes between Brahman and the world? Absolutely nothing. Right? Why? By their own definition, not by my claim or Ramanujacharya's claim. Why can there be no similarity in attributes? Because Brahman has no attributes. Right? Brahman has, without attributes, the world is 100% full of attributes. Brahman is eternal. If we want to give some attributes, this is what we would give to him. He's eternal. This world is temporary. Brahman is full of knowledge. This world is ignorant. Brahman is full of bliss. This world is often miserable. So you've got, this is a case where somehow Brahman is confusing, we are confusing a rope with a unicorn. Right? It's not working. There's not enough similar attributes between A and B to cause a confusion. So, similarity of attributes. Second problem. In order for us to confuse a rope for a snake, what has to be true about the snake? it should be independently real, right? That's the only reason a snake can be confused, and the only reason it inspires fear in the person, gets a reaction, is because the person has an independent, real experience of snakes, or someone in their life does. And because snakes are independently real, therefore you can confuse them with ropes. The rope is Brahman. What is the snake? The world. Is the world independently real? No. It's not real, and it's not unreal either. It's neither real nor unreal. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the snake is not real. So how is it possible that we look at it? Would be like someone seeing a horse and going, "Oh, it's a unicorn." The only people who can do that are children, because they believe in unicorns. But if you know something, if there is no reality to something whatsoever, then you cannot possibly confuse it for something else. Okay? So this is argument number 2, that there has to be independent reality. Whoops. Here we go. Independent reality to both things. The snake and the rope have to be independently real, otherwise it doesn't work. Third problem. In order to confuse a snake with a rope, you have to have a prior experience of a snake. Otherwise, there's no fear. The first time a child sees a spider, the child is not afraid of a spider. It's only after a child sees a spider and someone in the family goes, "Ah!" then the child goes, "Oh, I got to be afraid of spiders," right? So without the independent experience of the snake, prior experience of the snake, there is no fear of snakes. This is highly problematic because the snake is the world. It's a product of Brahman's illusion. The snake is Maya, right? So unless Brahman has a prior experience of the world, which is itself a creation of his own confusion, so unless Brahman is confused beforehand, he could not be confused now. And he couldn't be confused beforehand if he hadn't been confused before that. The point is, you got to stop somewhere by saying, we actually had a real experience of a real world. Then only can that experience, then only can the illusion apply now, right? So there's no prior experience that can provide the cause of the fear itself. Fourth problem. How is it that everyone has the same confusion? While we are all pots in the ocean, we all have parceled consciousness. We have separated. This is what it means to be in a pot, is that we have partial. I don't know what you're thinking, and you don't know what I'm thinking. How is it that everyone looks at the world and sees exactly the same thing? Who coordinates those illusions? Either God has to be the grand evil master coordinating the world's illusions, but there is no God, so it has to be Brahman. There's no good answer to that question. Fifth thing, and this, I put down B, C, D, coordination. Okay, and this fifth thing is now, so the first 4 that I talked about, these are not my own ideas. These are from Jiva Goswami's Sandarbhas. He goes through and he very quickly mentions these problems with the rope snake metaphor in the Paramatma Sandarbha. This 5th one, he also mentions, but it comes originally from the Saptavidha Anupapatti, the 7 great untenables of Ramanujacharya. He says, remember that neither real nor unreal business, anirvachaniya. This world is neither real nor unreal. He says it's a special category of substance, which is anirvachaniya. Ramanujacharya says, what experience or evidence do we have for the existence of such things that are neither real nor unreal? In order to provide evidence for the existence or reality of anything, you need a valid means of getting evidence. Okay? And there's 3 valid means of getting evidence, at least. Pratyaksha, Anuman, and Shabda. Direct sense experience, inference, and scripture. Shabda. And Ramanujacharya goes with each one, and he says, none of these 3 pramanas lead us to a point of where we can admit the existence of an entity that is neither real nor unreal. When you come to experience, has anyone experienced here anything that is neither real nor unreal? What does that thing look like? How do you experience it? It's not there, he says. There's no pratyaksha for it. Anumana, which is logic. He says the fundamental principle of logic is that something is either real or it's unreal, right? 2 opposites are not true at the same time. Real and unreal, or neither real nor unreal. A and not A can't be true at the same time. And then the third thing he says is in the scriptures, there is really no mention of any concept of this anirvachaniya, this half-existent entities. Not there. So he says there's no way of actually getting to know, no pramana. There's no experience of any kind we have of these special entities of Maya. And the last one I will tell you is it's the real clincher. It's the one that really, this is the one you should remember in case you forget them all. This is the one that is universally applicable to Mayavad in all its metaphors. Okay? And the question is really simple. Where is Maya located? Who is in Maya, to put it another way? Who is confused? Who's the man who walks out and sees the snake instead of the rope? Or to move to our next metaphor, what's the jar? Where is the jar? What is it made of? The answer to all of these questions, there's only one possible answer. Brahman, right? Because there's nothing else that exists according to the Advaitins. According to the Mayavadis, there's no other existent entity, Brahman. So who is in Maya? Who is confused? Brahman. Where does Maya exist? In Brahman. What does that mean? It means that ignorance, avidya, is a fundamental part of Brahman. It's there in Brahman. That this entity that we started off with as Sat, Chit, and Ananda, somewhere in him, he's got illusion. He's got ignorance. And so much so that that ignorance has the capacity to overcome even him. That pot that we're talking about, that covers him. What is that pot made of? Upadhis. What are these upadhis? They're avidyas. Where does avidya exist? In the water. That water is Brahman. So you have completely contradicted what is it that you're saying about Brahman, the nature of Brahman. Srila Prabhupada mentions this often in his arguments against this idea that Krishna is not actually Krishna we're worshipping, it's the one within Krishna. He says, why should we listen to Bhagavad Gita if Krishna is one of us? Why are his words any better than mine if he too is covered by Maya just like I am? And are you saying that Maya is therefore greater than the Lord himself? That it has the capacity to cover him? Even if you try this, no, it's not, Maya doesn't cover all of Brahman, it just covers part of Brahman. Does that work? No, because Brahman has no parts. As soon as you talk about a part of Brahman, now you're coming in the direction of us, right? The living entities are part and parcel of the Lord. And now you've got variety, you've got difference, you've got distinction, you've got creation. There's the Lord, and there are his parts and parcels. The Advaitin cannot accept any parts within Brahman. This question of where is Maya located, who is in Maya, this is probably the greatest of his Saptavidha Anupapatis, his 7 great untenables, is trying to explain the location, the origin, the place of rest for Maya. We don't know where to put it. Is Maya in Brahman? No, we can't put Maya in Brahman. We can't put avidya in Brahman. Not Maya as the impersonalists think of Maya. Our concept of Maya, sure, it exists in Brahman because it's his Shakti. But the Advaitin idea of Maya, you can't put him in Brahman because Maya is avidya, is ignorance. Oh, and can we put Maya outside of Brahman? No, because that would make 2 things, right? Brahman and Maya. God and the devil. There's only one thing in Vedanta. That's the fundamental premise of the system. Another follow-up question to this that Ramanujacharya asks. He says, how could anything have the capacity to obscure Brahman, to obscure the brilliance and the knowledge of Brahman? We are not talking about a table lamp here that is covered by a lampshade. We are talking about something that is unlimitedly brilliant and whose knowledge, whose very nature is knowledge. The Mayavadis say that Brahman is not full of knowledge. That's an attribute. Brahman is knowledge. His very nature is knowledge, is consciousness, it's brilliance. And you're saying that somehow that becomes covered by illusion, by ignorance? It would be like saying that I could take a pot into the orb of the sun and somehow block some of the sun's rays. That's not going to happen. The pot will turn into the sun. Right? Krishna Surya Sama, Maya hai andhakar. Jahan Krishna, tahan nahi mayar adhikar. You can't put the 2 together. You can't put Brahman and ignorance together. Yes, if you're willing to admit that there are things outside Brahman, energies that are spun off, then yes. There are clouds that can cover the sun. No. Clouds don't cover the sun. Who do they cover? Us. Right? They cover us. So if you're willing to admit separate us's, then sure, Maya can cover. But if you're not willing to admit anything outside the sun, then where are your clouds coming from? You think a cloud is going to survive in the sun to cover a part of it? First of all, we don't even know what these clouds are made of or where they exist. We already dealt with that. But even if we give it to them and we say that it does exist, how? How is it possible that anything can obscure the absolute brilliance and knowledge of Brahman? And the very last thing I will say, or Ramanujacharya will quote him for, he says, the possibility of a 100% unattributed, attributeless reality is impossible. That you cannot possibly conceive of anything that is without attributes. You remember that experience we did? The experiment, rather, of trying to imagine this Brahman? As soon as you try to imagine it, what happens? You create attributes for it. As soon as you try to speak of it, what happens? You create attributes for it. As soon as you do anything, you come close to this reality, you need attributes. So Ramanujacharya says, how about if Brahman is truly unlimited and the greatest and absolute, how about instead of trying to protect his absoluteness by removing every attribute, anything that could possibly make him relative and changing, instead of taking away his form and his color, and if you take away the world and you take away the jivas and we remove, how about instead of doing that, what if we just pile everything on? What if we do the opposite? We say that Brahman is unlimited because he has every form, every color, every relationship, every shape, every quality that you can imagine he possesses. So what if we go on the other extreme, he says. An absolute reality means a reality that's extreme, right? It's not a reality that's a relative reality like us. So instead of making it extreme on this side by divesting him, by saying not this, not this, not this, how about we try the other side and we say, and this also, and this also, and this also, and this also. And he says, this is the actual definition of Brahman. Not the supreme unattributed reality, but the supremely attributed reality. That reality who has every characteristic that you can possibly imagine. Every quality, every color, every shape, every form. Those that we know about and those we do not. Those we can imagine and those we cannot. What if we say that all of those attributes will come together in him and they will cause contradictions, unlimited contradictions? Because we will have to say that this Brahman, instead of saying Brahman is neither black nor white, as Shankaracharya would say, what if we say that Brahman is black and he's also white? What if instead of saying that he is neither large nor small, we say he is both large and very small? What if instead of saying he is neither far away nor close by, we say he is both far away and very close by? And what if all those contradictions that are created from that we accept, we agree with, we hold on to, and we say, this is where the confusion lies. Because the Lord is achintya, is inconceivable. So instead of making this world a totally confusing place that is neither real nor unreal, a place that we have no words for because we cannot experience what is neither real nor unreal, nor describe it. It's indescribable, anirvachaniya. How about instead of doing that to the world, what if we put the confusion where it really belongs? In the person of Brahman. Because wasn't it Brahman who was supposed to be the supreme and the absolute and the highest and the greatest? Isn't that what the word Brahman means? Bringhati means to be great, to be spread far and beyond. Isn't that what we're supposed to be confused about? Or was it about this world? He says this world is something that is straightforward. It's simple. It's clear. We see it. We know how to operate in it. We know what the consequences of our actions are. We more or less have this world figured out, right? Why cause confusion here? Instead, let's accept the confusion where it truly belongs, in the Lord himself, because he is the 100% attributed reality. In Jiva Goswami's words, Sarva Viruddha Dharma Ashraya, he who is the abode of all contradictions, of all contradictory qualities. He is the agatana ghatana patiyasi. He is the one whose energy makes the impossible possible. And so, if we think of Krishna, he is the one who is able to have a relationship with every person and every individual in every way possible. Because he is Akhila Rasamrita Murti, in Rupa Goswami's words. He is the complete abode of all relationships. And that makes for a very contradictory personality. But that's okay in Krishna. I mean, when Arjuna sees his universal form, Arjuna's reaction is, wow, I didn't know this side of you. I didn't know this was who you were. He's completely surprised. He's shocked. He's afraid. I thought you were my friend or my teacher at most. We used to sit on the same bed and laugh together. And now this? I wasn't expecting this. What side of you is this? And Krishna says, Kalosmi, Sarvakshaya Krit Pravidho. Time I am, the great destroyer of all these worlds. Oh my God, I didn't know that side of you. So it's a contradictory side. The one who sits on Arjuna's bedstead and laughs and jokes. Oh, very contradictory nature than the one who is death, swallowing all living entities. But in Krishna, they can coexist. He can have a relationship with each person just the way we want it. If we're introverts, Krishna can be an introvert with us. If we're extroverts, he can be an extrovert. If we like funny lords, he can be a funny lord. If we want serious gods, he can be a serious lord. Krishna is everything, all at once, the supremely attributed reality. That looks beautiful in the Lord. It does not look beautiful in the world. So that's Ramanujacharya's alternative that he's offering in this in his theory. This is called Vishishtadvaita, or the non-duality of the supremely qualified Lord. Vishishtadvaita. Vishishta is a designation for God. The supremely qualified is Vishishta. Advaita means non-dual. So his view is it's still non-dual. Everything is part of the Lord. Why? Because he's supremely qualified in every way. Every quality and every attribute is present within him. So, we're going to go through this and we're going to see how Ramanujacharya talks about his explanation of Tattvam Asi. It's beautiful. And Jiva Goswami's as well. That phrase that we put on the board today, you are that. We'll see how Ramanujacharya explains it. And how Jiva Goswami explains it. Okay, so you have the full alternative picture. And we'll see how he regards this world and its relationship to Brahman. It's not the rope and the snake, not the pot in the water, but we'll see what our Vaishnavacharyas do to explain the nature of the jiva, to explain the nature of the world, and to explain the nature of Brahman. So we'll go through all of that, but I think this is sufficient for today. There's only so much philosophy we can take in. Yeah, so tomorrow, here's the plan. I want to leave a few minutes for questions here. Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. So this is a nice note to end on. So Brahmananda, okay, this bliss of Brahman. Why are the Advaitins doing all this? Honestly, it's not to make anyone's life miserable. It's not to make their lives miserable. It's not. The reason is genuine. Everyone is looking for a way to end suffering and experience transcendental bliss. This bliss is known as Brahmananda, the bliss of Brahman. Why? Because the Upanishads say very clearly that Anandam Brahma, that Brahman is Ananda, he's bliss. So if we're going to know Brahman and we're not tasting this bliss, something is going wrong. So this attempt to achieve this bliss of Brahman, this is what the impersonalists are after. Sanatana Goswami, in his commentary, Digdarshani, commentary on the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, he raises this question. He says, this bliss of Brahman is spoken about in our scriptures, and certainly the impersonalists claim to experience it. Is there such a bliss? Is there such a bliss? Is there a bliss? Is there a joy present in liberation? And he says, yeah, just a little. He says, a slight joy may occur. These are his words in translation. A slight joy may occur. What kind of joy? He says, this is the joy of a person who's diseased when they become free of disease. This is the joy of someone who is in deep and dreamless sleep, whose disturbing dreams are gone and can enjoy a deep dreamless sleep. He says, this is the joy that is present in impersonal liberation. You have basically turned off the pain of karma. You've turned off the pain of suffering in this world, but you've not yet experienced what life is really about. So just as when you're free of disease, you feel better, or when you're in deep sleep, you feel well, he says there can be some joy in Brahman. A slight joy may occur. But why then, he asks, do the scriptures talk about this joy of Brahman? Why do they go on and on about it? The joy of one who knows Brahman? He says, this is because of the tushyatu durjanaha nyaya, the logic of let the rascal be pleased. And what this means is that basically the scriptures give in a little bit. They say, yes, there is some joy. Just so you can try to give up the joy of the material world, and so that they can take that little joy and they can compare that drop of joy to the unlimited bliss of bhakti. So he says, therefore, a slight joy is described. The scriptures talk about it, sometimes in effusive terms. Tushyatu durjanaha, let the rascal be pleased. Let's give in a little bit and say, okay, there is some joy, I agree. But now try this joy. Yes, you felt that the banana was sweet, I agree. Now try the gulab jamun and see how it tastes. But then he deals with an objection. Someone asks, well, if Brahman is unlimited, which he is, anantam, shouldn't the joy be unlimited that you experience from this impersonal Brahman? And he says no. The reason is because Brahman is sukha rupa, but not sukha dhara. Means Brahman is the very form of bliss, but he is not the source of bliss for others. Why not? Why can't Brahman be the source of bliss for others, even though itself Brahman is bliss? Because Brahman is not attributed. There is no attribute. To be the source of bliss, you have to be blissful. You have to be able to give bliss to others. And the definition of Brahman is what? Completely no attributes. So Brahman is bliss. Brahman is not blissful. Brahman is bliss itself. And it is incapable of giving bliss to others because it is not sukhadhara. It is not the adhara, the support of bliss for others, because that would make it relative, that would make it attributed. This is not something that he's saying, this is something that the Mayavadis would agree with. This is something they do agree with. Brahman is not blissful, he's not the source of bliss, he is bliss, period. And the only reason you're happy in Brahman is because you realize you are Brahman. But he says, Brahman is not the basis of bliss for others, but he is bliss himself. Krishna, on the other hand, the personal form is both Sukha Rupa, Ananda Vigraha, Ananda Ghana. He is the form This word ghana in Sanskrit, he's always ananda ghana rupa. Ghana means, like ghanashyam, ghana means condensed. He's the thickened form of bliss. Ananda ghana. He's bliss in substance. If you could touch bliss, if you could feel joy, if you could hold on to joy, that would be Krishna. He's Ananda Ghana. And therefore, he is both the form of bliss and the source of bliss for others. He is Sukha Rupa also. Therefore, we call him Rama. Ramate iti Ramaha, he who is blissful, who enjoys his Rama. Ramayati iti Ramaha, he who gives joy to others. That person is also Rama. Therefore, he says, even though Brahman is unlimited, the joy of Brahmananda is a little drop. It's very limited. And therefore, it's not good enough to satisfy the soul. Once we achieve it, we want something more. And Krishna, on the other hand, is both. He says he's like a lump of sugar. The sugar itself is sweet, and anyone who eats the sugar also feels sweet at the same time. That's Krishna's nature. Okay, so I think that's a nice positive place to stop for the day. We are past our time. I think it was 1 o'clock that we were given, and was it 1 o'clock? Two, 1, 2, 1. Okay. I think this is enough philosophy for today. Beyond this, our minds will explode, and so we're gonna stop here. But let me just open it up for a few questions, since I think it was 2, but I don't want to go further on this point, and I don't want to take questions for an hour. So let's do maybe 15 minutes of question and answers, and then after that we'll call it a day. We'll call it for close, okay? So this time let's start from the back.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Thank you very much for the wonderful explanation. So, Advaita, to understand, is it true to state that Advaita talks about 3 subject matters, primarily Jiva, Ishvara, and the world, which is described as Maya, which cannot be described. Now, the question is, if, for example, if an Advaitin would see a tree outside, what is their take on the existential aspect of it, in the sense, if it is not bound to exist in the sense of matter, so do they even acknowledge the physical presence, or in other words, do they consider pratyaksha as an invalid pramana?
No. So this is a great question. I really like the question. The reason is because it allows me to speak about one important thing that I completely forgot in the Mayavad view, which is the different levels of reality. So the question you have is, how do you function in the world if you consider it to be neither real nor unreal? And it's a genuine question. And the Mayavadis would say, okay, there are 3 levels of reality. Okay, there's paramarthika satta, which means ultimate reality, the ultimate truth. From that perspective, this world is not real. Only Brahman is real. Our individuality is illusory as well. There's a level right below that called vyavaharika satta. Vyavaharika is conventional reality. And on the conventional reality level, it is true to say that there is a tree growing out there, that if you walk out in front of a bus, you will get run over. In the vyavaharika level, all of these things are true. So while we are in this world, we have to operate on the vyavaharika level. And this is how they justify the practice of bhakti as well, or the chanting of Hare Krishna, or Krishna Katha, is that this is all on the vyavaharika level. And in the vyavaharika realm, in the realm of conventional reality, these things are good. They give you good karma. Ultimately, there's no good or bad karma, right? Because the whole world is unreal. But on the conventional level, yes, there's good karma, there's bad karma, and getting good karma is better than getting bad karma. And purifying your consciousness, focusing it on the deity, is better than doing it on sense gratification. So on all this level, we can talk about it. So they'll speak Krishna Katha on the Vyavaharika level. But from the Paramarthika perspective, from the ultimate perspective, it has no reality.
So time, so whichever is subjected by time, I mean its material aspect,
Yes.
and it's bound to degradation,
Yes.
those are accepted as a part of the conventional reality.
Yes.
So the definition of reality itself is being multi-tiered.
Yes.
Okay.
That's why it gets, when we speak of word jugglery, it becomes so slippery trying to deal with Mayavad, because they will make claims that sound very similar to our claims. That, oh, we worship Krishna, and yes, we should do this, and it's good to engage in bhakti, we should study Bhagavati, all those same, but it's all at the Vyavaharika level. Right? From the Paramarthika perspective, it's more or less unreal or useless.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhuji.
So Prabhuji, I will go back to Brahma Sutra. So in Brahma Sutra, essentially, Ved Vyas is describing what is Brahman, and then towards the end says how to reach there, basically. Yes. Right? The Saguna and Nirguna aspect. But is there anywhere he is directly referring to the term Maya, or is it more like a derived meaning in the interpretations?
In the Vedanta Sutra, yeah, I don't remember. I don't remember in the Brahma Sutra if the word Maya actually occurs or not. I doubt it, but I might be wrong. Yeah. So the word Maya, the reason it shows up in Advaita philosophy is because the word Maya is present all the way from the Rig Veda, all through the Upanishads and the Puranas and so on. So remember, Brahma Sutra, Vedanta Sutra is not a textbook. It's only hooks, a mnemonic device as a key to the Upanishads. And the Upanishads do speak about Maya.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised because it is such an important concept, and he left out or he indirectly referred there. That was the point I was not sure.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Prabhu in the back has.
Prabhu, my question is related to Brahman. So if we say Brahman is the unlimited bliss, and in Mayavad philosophy, it means that Brahman is also the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then if Brahman is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then what is Ishvara supposed to do is related to Brahman. So is such a term, Ishvara also exists in Mayavad philosophy?
Yes.
And the other question is Vivekananda also a Mayavad philosopher, or is a Bhakti follower?
Yeah, so Ishvara does exist in Mayavad philosophy because Ishvara is God on the Vyavaharika level, on the level of conventional reality. We can speak of him as God, but not from the ultimate perspective. From the Paramarthika level, there is no God. There's only Brahman who is existing. There's no supreme personality of Godhead, no Bhagavan who is existing at that level of ultimate reality. Yeah, and then in regards to Vivekananda, I don't want to comment on particular authors or gurus or teacher. I said that at the beginning of the. Better you take the understanding that we get from this discussion, and then you can read their works and you can apply yourself and you can see, or we can discuss individually afterwards. Okay.
Thank you for the nice discourse, bro. So I had a question regarding the popularity of the Mayavadi philosophy. So it came after atheism and almost drove away atheism from India, as you know, and like still now it's one of the popular philosophies. So what are some of the key reasons of this? Is it like one I can think is that you can become God, and I think Shankaracharya mentioned Mayavad philosophy only, right? Not like Brahma, but what he mentioned is the Mayavad philosophy, isn't it? So
yeah. So actually, Mayavadi has never not been present in India. It always will be. Even what you're calling atheism, I'm presuming you're speaking of Buddhist views, and even there, I mean, I wouldn't call it atheism per se. The Vaishnavas consider Shankaracharya to be a Channa Bodha, to be a covered Buddhist, right? To be a hidden Buddhist. And in fact, it's very interesting because recent scholarship on Shankara and early Advaita shows significant overlaps with late Buddhist ideas as well. So it's a pretty continuous spectrum from Buddhism to Advaita. And then from Advaita to forms of Neo-Advaita, or new forms of Mayavad that appear later on during the colonial period in India with so many other teachers, right? So Mayavad is something that's always been present, it always will be, it's always been there. In fact, our acharyas speak of, you know, the story of Paundraka in Bhagavatam, the fake Vasudev. They speak of him as an original Mayavadi who wanted to be like Krishna, and they speak about how Krishna dealt with him. So it's really, Mayavad is something that's always been there, it always will be. And the reason for this we discussed at the beginning of the seminar, namely that this is why we're here in the material world. And this is why we're present, is we want this opportunity to be Krishna, to be God, to be at the center of things. And this philosophy in all its many forms allows us, it promotes us to that level. So it's very attractive.
I think, Prabhu, that's the reason Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentioned that atheism is better than, I mean, sense gratifiers, they are at least better than the Mayavadis. Yes. At least they are not defying God.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Okay. So this devotee here, and then we'll move over here.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, my question is related to Brahmananda. Like, do Mayavadi really get Brahmananda? Because the tool that they are using, the scriptures, they themselves say that the Shabda are not enough to describe the Brahman. And the scripture they are using just to transcend from the avidya. But as scriptures are not sufficient or complete enough to get out of the avidya, like what is their realization as they are talking much about Brahmananda, like what is their realization and value of their realization?
So one thing the Mayavadis are very good at is getting out of this conception that I'm the body. And that concept of I am the body is the root of so much of our misery in this world. It's just that once the question arises of if we're not the body, what are we? That's where everything goes wrong. So temporarily, Mayavad is really good at giving relief from disease, as Sanatana Goswami says. It's like the joy of a person who has just recovered from a disease. But unless you have an alternative to engage in something better, you can't maintain that position. You have to have a way to maintain health, to live a healthy life that's full of vitality. And that they do not know what to do. And so eventually they fall down again. Aruhya krichena patantyadho nadita yushmadangraya. Yes? So therefore, as he says, a slight joy may occur. And that's more or less what he says. Yes.
So you mentioned about how intention versus the action. Like a person who may have the intention to become Krishna, even though they may be doing the actions of kirtan, so still the intention is, is critical in that situation for them to attain the real realization of their position. In your previous seminar from the past year, I think it was, you had mentioned about how forgiveness, even action, Krishna accepts.
Yes.
So then how do we connect the two? Or should we just say Krishna is supremely independent, so he can accept the action even of a Mayavadi as bhakti sometimes?
Yeah.
Or
yeah. This is a wonderful question. I think it's a nice question to end upon our session for today. So Krishna, he accepts our intention when the action is not present, and he accepts our action when the intention is not present, right? But at the same time, for something to be bhakti, it has to be favorably performed towards the Lord, right? Anukulyena Krishnanushilanam. And when that anukul is not there, then Krishna tries his best to overcome that by saying, okay, at least you're thinking of me, therefore I shall help you. At least you're acting for me without realizing it, let me help you. So even with the Mayavadis or with the impersonalists, Krishna helps them by absorbing them into his body or by giving them a location in the Brahmajyoti, his own effulgence. This is described as the destination is the Viraja river, the river that separates the material and the spiritual world. That's the location. That's called Brahmaloka, not Brahma as in the four-headed Brahma, but Prabhupada explains in one purport, Brahmaloka as in Brahman, the effulgence of the Lord. So that interim location is where Krishna gives them a location, gives them a home. Prabhupada explains that the yogis, those yogis who are impersonalists, they sometimes get absorbed into Krishna's body. And the Mayavadis of the type we're talking about get absorbed in Krishna's effulgence. So Krishna attempts to benefit them as well, right? He's still giving them something better than what they have currently, which is life in this world. But sadly, it's not a very permanent location because the anukula is not there. They're not dealing with Krishna, Krishna in a favorable way, right? And when that favorable connection is not there, then ultimately it can't last because it's not bhakti, right? So unless by the mercy of a Vaishnava that can be transformed into some kind of positive understanding, like it happened with the Kumaras, it's very difficult for it to be permanently located. Yeah. But even then, even with the Mayavadis, if Krishna helps them in some fashion or another, that destination of being in Krishna's effulgence or body is better than their current condition, yes, but it is like hell for a devotee. This is called Kaivalya Narakayate. It's worse than hell because the acharyas, they describe that at least in hell you can think of Krishna. You can still remember Krishna. You can still chant the holy name. But in Krishna's Brahmajyoti, all capacity for expression of our bhakti is lost because our individuality is lost. And in Krishna's body, that position is even worse. That's worse than anything else because it's attempting to enter the Lord himself. It's a very terrible thing. So Krishna helps everyone. But from a devotee's perspective, it's a terrible destination. Yeah. Okay, let's pause here. Thank you all so much. Let me just say for tomorrow, here's the preview, what's coming up. Tomorrow we're going to look at Ramanujacharya's philosophy. It's really beautiful. It's really joyful, the way he talks about this world as the body of the Lord. And he describes the explanation of Tattvam Asi, which is phenomenal. This you are that. If this is a phrase you've heard of before, that thou art, you'll definitely want to hear Ramanujacharya's explanation of this phrase. And then we're going to talk about the peace treaty. So after the battle is done, then the peace treaty, what are ways, points of commonality that we can come together with on in terms of impersonalism and personalism, points of common ground. And then at the end, we're going to end with some beautiful, beautiful verses that I know you'll really enjoy. These are from Srila Rupa Goswami's, well, I won't say right now. And you can come for that later. Okay? Tomorrow, 12 to 2. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu told Sanatana Goswami after Sanatana had traded his fancy blanket with an old quilt that a doctor does not let even the last vestiges of a disease linger within the patient. So similarly, as Prabhu has advised us, any trace of Mayavad that we have left must be eradicated by coming back tomorrow at 12 o'clock. Please don't leave it a chance. It's a rare opportunity to hear information about Krishna so perfectly organized and coming from a pure heart. So try to be here front row, or at least join online, but don't miss this for any reason, is my humble advice. Let's thank His Grace Radhika Raman Prabhu one last time, but not too long because he's got to go home and rest. Radhika Raman Prabhu. And thanks to all of you here in the live studio audience and also online for having the good sense to take advantage of this. Vanchakopdaruscha kripasanabhevacha patitanam pavanibhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha nantakoti vaishnavindiki jai gaur premanande haribol. If you can please help by putting the asanas back, and have a great day. Hare Krishna.